Hello, I'm Duncan, the architecture editor at Golf Digest, and today we're looking at one of the most visually dazzling holes in the continental U.S., the 13th at Pacific Dunes at Bandon Dunes Resort. It's a 444-yard par 4 that stretches along the Pacific Ocean cliffs. Let's take a closer look. It's difficult to remember now, but there was a time, as recently as a quarter century ago, that most people believed that most of the great golf sites in the country had been used up. The assumption wasn't necessarily based on the belief that there was no good land left, but rather that the good pieces of land that did exist were too far away or too hard to get to for anyone to use them. No sane person would drive hours and hours to play golf in the vacant sand dunes of remote western Nebraska, to the Gulf of St. Lawrence bluffs on the extremity of eastern Canada, or to the cold and rainy coast of southern Oregon. But when developer Mike Kaiser opened the first course at Bandon Dunes in 1999, what could have easily turned into a risky flop of epic proportions suddenly became an overnight sensation. Golfers flocked to the faraway cliffs of southwest Oregon, and Bandon Dunes sold out its tee times for the entire year. Bandon Dunes proved that if the golf was stimulating and different, and the atmosphere and setting was inspiring, there's no distance golf dreamers wouldn't travel. Kaiser knew he had hit on something fundamental in the golf spirit by creating a links-inspired, walking-only course in a draw-dropping environment. He also knew that people traveling the inconvenient distance to the Oregon coast would ultimately need more than just one golf course to keep them coming. Bandon's second course, Pacific Dunes, designed by Tom Doak and opened 2 years later, was built on an even more dramatic site just north of the first, with larger dunes, more elevation changes, and holes that appeared to hug the cliffs even tighter. The 13th hole in particular became an avatar of all the magic Pacific Dunes possessed, a dazzling showcase of cliffs, dunes, sand and seagrass all in one place. The 13th runs north along the Pacific bluffs into the prevailing summer wind. The fairway is enormous, 75 yards wide in the landing zone, with an up and over crown beginning at about 275 yards from the back tee. If drives can get over the crest, especially from the middle tees, they can shoot forward into a large basin on the left, shortening the approach, though the putting surface won't be entirely visible from the hollow. If drives stray too far to the right, they'll kick sideways in the opposite direction. The left edge of the hole is the ocean, and the far right side is defined by a dune ridge, where the bunkers, excavated by the wind, were already there. Doak and Jim Urbina, who built the course with Doak and the rest of the crew at Renaissance Golf Design, added the large bunker short and right of the green to keep players honest. Those drives that are steered to the right by the crown have to fly over the bunker into the wind in order to get close to the green. However, the most defining feature of the hole is the vertical dune that stands adjacent to the green on the right, one of the largest single specimens at Bandon Dunes at nearly 60 feet in height. The dune frames the right side of the green, which is boxed in on the opposite side by the cliff, making it a demanding and frightening target, especially in the normal summer headwinds, though there's room to play short and there's also room behind the putting surface. With Whiskey Run Beach 100 feet below, you can imagine these two sand hollows to the right of the green get a lot of action. Because of the wind and the severity of the miss, the green, which sits up a little, is not especially severe. It generally moves right to left off the dune, and the middle and left half of the green slides slightly downhill toward the fairway. There's a flat area toward the center and rear that can support hole locations, but shots that don't make it all the way onto the surface will be repelled by several humps here that make a false front. On this green, the middle is always a good place to be. It's also a fascinating terminal point. You're not really aware of it in the moment, certainly not the first time you play the course, but the 13th green is the culmination of an unbroken stretch of holes that take you the length of the Pacific Dunes coastline, from the 10th tee at the far southern end of the property near Bandon Dunes 6th green, onto the sublime par 3 11th, to the cross-country par 5 12th, and then back to the cliffs at 13, a total distance of 3/4 of a mile. Unlike other famous cliffside holes like the 16th at Cypress Point or the 8th at Pebble Beach, Pacific Dunes 13th is not a risk-reward hole. At the latter two, golfers have the option of hitting heroic shots over coves of ocean to try to get on or near those greens in regulation. They also have the option of hedging their bets by aiming left of the green toward portions of fairway that become incrementally shorter the safer they choose to aim. The 13th, on the other hand, is a strategic hole. There's no big carry to pull off or corner to cut. The risk here is one of degrees. How close to the edge of the cliff do you want to drive it in order to get an unobstructed angle into the green? Whether playing from the top of the crown or down in the bowl, the shot is clear. If you don't hit that line, you might be over here, and now you're shooting across the bunker here toward the edge of the cliff. It's hard to overemphasize how game-changing Bandon Dunes and a hole like the 13th at Pacific Dunes was to golf travel and golf development. It's no secret golfers love to play near bodies of water, in particular oceans and bluffs. It's why Pebble Beach has been the #1 course on almost everybody's bucket list for nearly 100 years, and others like Turnberry, Royal Portrush, and Ballybunion are annually ranked among the world's best. But that experience, especially in the United States, is extremely rare. Only a handful of courses have been built directly on the ocean headlands. Many were constructed in golf's early years. Pebble Beach, open to the public, was finished in 1919, and Alistair McKenzie's Cypress Point, a private course, opened a decade later. In the following 30 years, only a small number of seaside courses were constructed on the West Coast, like Torrey Pines and the second course at Monterey Peninsula Country Club. In all, from the 1930s to the debut of Bandon Dunes in 1999, just 14 courses were built close enough to the 1,100 miles of Pacific coast that you could actually lose a golf ball on the beach. Depending on how you classify what constitutes a real oceanfront hole, they together combine for perhaps 36 holes that bring golfers in intimate contact with the surf or bluffs. By the time Pacific Dunes opened, golfers who ventured to Bandon could slice a drive or even tumble off the cliffs on 11 holes, all without the interference or distraction of hotels, villas, real estate, or roads. Bandon and Pacific Dunes signified golf's reunion with the ocean. They were the closest thing to Pebble Beach and Cypress Point the world had seen in 70 years, with the 13th hole at Pacific Dunes symbolizing the new greatest meeting of land and sea. But that meeting almost never happened. As he was forecasting his second course at Bandon Dunes in the late 1990s, Mike Kaiser took a gamble and hired Tom Doak, who was then relatively unknown in mainstream golf circles. Doak walked the land and developed an initial routing for what would become Pacific Dunes, while David McClay Kidd, another little-known architect, was beginning construction on the first Bandon Dunes course. On a return visit, Doak learned that Kaiser had given Kidd a portion of the property that had originally been designated for Pacific Dunes, an area that Kidd used for Bandon's 6th, 7th, and 8th holes. Suddenly, Doak was without about 70 acres of land he'd intended to use. Doak had 3 holes running this way across Kidd's 7th and 8th fairways. This turn of event blew up his concept for the course. It was back to the drawing board. On the topographical map Doak and Urbina were using, the northern property line for Pacific Dunes site was here. Between this boundary and the acreage lost to the Bandon Dunes course, the options for routing 18 holes that would maximize the stunning potential of the land were now limited, with just around 140 acres to work with. When Doak mentioned this challenge, Kaiser told him there was actually more land to the north that he could explore if he wanted to replace possibly what had been sacrificed to the first course. When Doak and Urbina went to the northern boundary and looked through the barbed wire fence, all they could see were dunes and a thicket of gorse. They didn't have any idea what was on the other side. So they drove around to the backside of the property on old roads, through what is now Old McDonald, and came in from the backside and hiked over the top of the dunes to the north. What lay beneath them was startling, a wide plain that looked ideally proportioned for golf, though it was almost entirely blanketed in thorny, impenetrable gorse. Doak was able to navigate a footpath through the gorse to an area back near the old property line over 400 yards away and took this photo. This is Urbina standing here in the red. In October of 1999, after the first course had opened, a wildfire of unknown origin started nearby. Overnight, it tore through the highly flammable gorse that covered major sections of the Pacific Dunes property, including the prospective 13th hole, burning the bushes down to the roots. Thankfully, it stopped before it did any damage to the resort, but it had accomplished what it would have otherwise taken more time, money, and labor to do. It completely cleared the land, opening up views of the natural contours that before could only be divined through topographical maps. When the design team could see the now naked ground of the 13th for the first time, all the shapes were already there for a great hole. The architects sand-capped the edge of the cliff to level it, then capped the green with sand and shaped it, then dug the bunker short right, grassed the hole, and voila, the 13th hole of the Pacific Dunes. The ability to access the new land for the 13th changed everything. It enabled the revelation of one of the most instantly recognizable holes in American golf, and to build the lovely and difficult par 3 14th coming back in the opposite direction. It also gave them the land for the new green at the par 5 third hole that they tucked into a nook of dunes above the fairway. That green gives golfers the course's first reveal of the Pacific Ocean, as well as that foreshadowing look north to the 13th hole. In 2024, Pacific Dunes' 13th hole was named the 14th best hole in America by Golf Digest panelists and was one of 5 holes to make the list from this course. It played a critical role in expanding the visibility and popularity of Pacific Dunes to a national golf audience, and has certainly been an emotional factor in elevating the design to a top 20 ranking on our America's 100 Greatest Courses list. The success of Pacific Dunes and Bandon Dunes also helped fuel a global rush for great golf sites. It gave developers the confidence to explore building golf in places previously impossible to imagine, like Nova Scotia, the outback of South Central Florida, Western Montana, Tasmania, the coast of New Zealand, even Mongolia. The lesson was that golfers would go almost anywhere in the world for the right combination of sandy soils, beautiful aesthetics, and a great architect. Tom Doak was the beneficiary of many of these commissions, but so were Bill Coore and Ben Crenshaw, Gil Hance, Kyle Phillips, and the person who started it all at Bandon, David McClay Kidd. When Bandon Dunes first opened, the golf press naturally began comparing it to Pebble Beach, not just for its clifftop ocean frontage, but also because it was open to the public. When Pacific Dunes opened, Tom Doak, reacting to those comments, said that if Bandon was like Pebble, Pacific Dunes was more like Cypress Point. Tom's affinity for Alister MacKenzie and Cypress Point are no secret, and his words could be construed as him gladly connecting his course to that important lineage as a way to draw a distinction between it and the first Bandon course. But it's also appropriate because Pacific Dunes and Bandon Dunes are two courses that share a geography but look and play differently, as do Pebble and Cypress. Bandon is big and bold and plays on top of the land. It's exposed, like Pebble. Pacific sits down in the dunes and twists in and out of different microenvironments. That's Cypress Point. Whether you buy into this analogy or not, even having the discussion comparing these old and new oceanside courses tells us all we need to know about the extraordinary revelation that the courses at Bandon Dunes have become. And maybe Tom Doak was even underselling Pacific Dunes, and by extension the 13th hole. At least as it applies to you and me, Pacific Dunes outshine Cypress Point in at least one very important way. Each of us has the opportunity to go and experience it, if we choose. Thanks for watching. If there's another great hole you'd like to see us break down, let us know in the comments below.